Migration complete. Now what? This seems to be an ongoing theme as we talk to our customers who are Office 365 or maybe now M365 customers, subscribers. Yes, they've moved their email to the cloud, and maybe they've moved their file shares from on-premises to the cloud through OneDrive. But there's so many new features and functionalities that our customers aren't yet taking care of, let alone the business users that really could hugely benefit from the adoption of the platform, not just the services. In our next session, led by Jerry Martin, cloud strategist at Planet Technologies, and Bob Ballard, our principal cloud strategist, we're going to discuss methodologies and ways customers can evaluate their business needs and their business goals so that Office 365 and M365 can meet their mission. Bob, Jerry, look forward to the presentation.
Hey, Jerry.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Good, good. So today we're really excited to talk to you about, sort of as Steve framed up, what happens when we're, quote, done with the migration. I always joke about this. So I start off with the slide that has a picture of base camp at Everest, right? The idea is, by the way, do you know how much effort it takes to just get yourself to base camp, which you look up and then have to climb the tallest mountain in the world, right? So customers always say, hey, I'm finished deploying Office 365. And I start talking to them a little bit, and they said, well, most of it, right? I'm finished deploying most of it. And then we talk a little bit more, and hey, did you know about Delve? You know about Teams? You know about this? You know about that? Okay, well, I've deployed some of it, right? It keeps shrinking the amount that we're talking about. And then they go, hey, Bob, they keep adding stuff, right? I thought I was done, or I thought I was close, or even thought I had some, and now I hardly have any.
It's the what about questions.
Right. And then, and then they go, oh yeah, what's this Azure thing again? And how does that play a place? And oh, they just released Teams in the government tenant? Okay, I'm all the way back to hardly having anything done. So the main issue here is, A, it's a moving target. B, they're just not, there's so much more there. So what do I do, right?
So on top of that, you have a considerable amount of information that they're bombarded with on a regular basis, whether it be security information, the things that you need to know before you go to the cloud, after you go to the cloud. It's just an avalanche of content, to use your Summit analogy. And the idea there is, what do you do and how do you manage all this information? How do you organize this information for your ability to say, I'm going to take on the next step? What's my next step? And does this article, does this blog post, does this information make sense to me? And how do I organize it all to make it really simple? Because when I get it simple, the idea is I just need to be able to say, I'm going to the cloud. And like you'll see here, it's just like the Indians used to do when they went to the cloud, right? You just puff of smoke and it goes up, right? It's not that simple. There's a lot more to it than that, right? So what we try to do is take on a very programmatic approach to this in an organized fashion and help folks understand really where it comes from, where their starting point is, and how they go from there.
Is that an actual picture of a customer from a meeting?
That's actually me.
It can be a little overwhelming, right? So what do? We kind of have to divide and conquer and map out a strategy here, right? So I love, I'm the king of smart art graphics and all these pictures.
Amazing
right?
work.
And, so we start with assessing what we got going on, right? Take a look, where are we? What do we have? Then I sort of evaluate that versus, other customers, other organizations, other people, in sort of my vertical or space, right? Then we sort of pick some things to target, right? The biggest thing where customers often make mistakes is they say, okay, what's next? And they have a pool of options that's 375 long, right? So we need to whittle it down a little bit and say, okay, in these spaces, how do I target that? And then within that sort of whittled down list, then we need to prioritize. Right?
And it's not that green, hairy, ugly thing in the back of the data center nobody wants to touch.
Right.
It's the ones we want to really target.
Right. And then, let's prioritize things And from both a technical perspective, like what do we need to get done to get there, and then on top of that, from a business perspective, right? As I mentioned in an earlier session, we want some wins that have high value, right, in our organization. And then finally, let's implement these. And then, just like all these great graphics do, we start all over again and revisit this thing. So what are some important things? You need to look at this stuff by workload, right? And I don't mean by product, that's different. General workloads, collaboration, enhanced security, things like that, broad topics.
Right.
And and then think broad, right? Don't be afraid to put big, bold bets in, even if it's in the longer term, right? So when we're having these conversations, I love customers often really want to get tactical right away. But the fact is that, and we need some tactical things. But the fact is, we need to think bigger so we know where to sail this ship over time, right? And then understand your dependencies, right? So obviously, I can't get to here without these couple of things going in, in advance, right?
So from a organization and how you put all that content together and how you have that conversation with somebody, Planet's created what we consider to be a way to have the dialogue in an organized manner to help understand where the priorities are, where you live in your starting line, because your starting line is different than everybody else's starting line to this race. So our ability to say, you start here, and from here, these are your next priorities. In every workload organization that you can think of, every category you can come across, we have it laid out and what your next steps would be in a holistic fashion. Here's what you look like, not what everybody looks like. And so what you see now is the cloud maturity model that the Planet teams put together. Just a quick note, this is a PaaS application with SharePoint on the back end with all the content and the content driven from SharePoint and SharePoint Online. So as an orientation, we have a number of swim lanes as Bob scrolls down the environment, and you see from Azure Applications environment, infrastructure, collaboration, all the way down through data intelligence, desktop management, Dynamics, Exchange messaging, identity, as well as security and Skype. So if Bob, roll back up to the collaboration, roll all the way up, and what you'll see is we're going to select an account that we're going to work with, and what we've done is we've already created an account and we've identified what that account looks like from where their starting point is. What's their strategy? So what you'll see now in the orientation is that for every swim lane, it's identified specifically in red where they are in that maturity for the model. So in this example, the customer does not have any cloud-based development activities. Their application development operations are all on-premise. They have a little bit of infrastructure in Azure for identity and authorization. And as we go through the maturity model, you'll see that a series of them are in various places on the model. So this helps us understand not only where your starting point is today, but also what the next priority looks like in order to mature the organization through what we think are the most important foundational things that you'll go through when you take your journey to the cloud. So we start from a security perspective because that's where we believe that foundation is important for most of our clients. Establish a security model and a profile that says we can consume the rest of the cloud opportunities that are available to us with that foundation in place. So in this case, the example is, as Bob hits the ellipsis there, you can see that we can identify where you are in the model, and then we can also take notes and understand what we capture from our cloud maturity sessions with our clients, what we think our next steps are, some key pieces of information that helps us identify what our next steps are for that specific workload.
So what you mean there is, we can actually, as we're capturing this information for other customers, we now have a baseline, right?
Absolutely.
So that you can look at where you fit in relationship to other similar organizations.
Which is what we try to represent there in that pie chart that tells you where you live as a baseline to the rest of the organizations that we deal with. And so if you close out that security swim lane there, you'll see that 0 is highlighted. So they're doing a lot of Windows client on-premise type of security models, and the next steps for that organization would be to continue to mature forward through the maturity model only as it applies to their strategy moving forward, what they want to accomplish or consume with the rest of the workloads that are available what we'll identify is what you need from a security in a modern workplace in order to be able to facilitate that.
So does this tool just stop with these blocks, or is there more?
Not at all, no. So if you take a look at one of those, Bob, what you'll see is that we identify and capture what our standard engagements are for each of those workloads, and for each block, what you would do. So if you're gonna, for example here, identify the next step for Azure AD Premium features and you wanna move forward with that, we have a standard engagement that helps facilitate a quick start for that. And you're able to select those and then be able to deliver that out to the client as a discussion topic. So do you want to swing through the take a look at the collaboration swim lane there. That one, again, another very common workload that we work on a regular basis that allows us to not only identify where your starting point is, but again, in relation to the rest of the workloads that you want to consider consuming, we identify what the next steps are and where you'd want to go there. So Bob, take a look at just some of the basic team collaboration there in the 100. And what you see is that groups and teams as a quick start, planning and enablement from a foundational security perspective, and then moving forward in order to be able to say from these pieces, they're relative to the rest of the strategy that we have as an organization. And it really helps us organize what your next steps are. Your next version 1.2 of your cloud journey, is defined as we go through this type of thing.
And so what you see here is we're able to then quickly, how frustrating, we have these great meetings with customers all the time. How frustrating it must be for customers to sort of have this great meeting. We talk about things, we get a plan, and then 10 days later they get an email in which they've forgotten all the stuff that you talked about.
Right.
So using this tool, we're able to quickly respond back.
Right away.
With that, and not only, obviously an email with potential next steps and all those things, but walk us through a little bit as well.
So what this does is it provides that entire model across the entire maturity model, but it also identifies specifically where you are as a report based on our assessment and what key information we have and potential next steps we can take for each swim lane. And this is delivered right away, right as we get done with the conversation, because we're taking our notes right here.
So the point of showing you all of this, right, is to really set up to frame the conversation of what our customers do next. Because the answer is, there's not one answer, right? The answer is, there's a number of ways you can go, and we need to sort of map it to your journey.
Absolutely.
The analogy that I like to use on this is, if I'm giving you directions to a party, Jerry, and then something taking my directions to a party, they might not be the same directions, but we're going to pass a lot of the same landmarks, and obviously end destination is the same. So how do we sort of frame up what those next steps are?
Correct.
And to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, what some of those next steps are with our customers across a broad spectrum of activities, I'd like to bring back Steve and introduce the panel.
Guys, I've been waiting for this panel. I'm so excited. I think we were talking a little bit before. I think this is the rockstar panel, right?
I would agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is going to be a fantastic discussion. I want to introduce our panelists. First, Aaron Gilmet. Aaron's a technology solutions professional with Microsoft focusing on business applications. Jeff Fowler, who's one of our senior cloud strategists here at Planet Technologies with a focus on security. Jerry, you met in the introduction. Denise Riley-Hughes, who's a cloud success manager at Microsoft, working with many state and local government customers, and of course Bob, also one of our presenters. Denise, I want to throw it to you first. We talk about these things as being very IT focused. Sometimes they seem to get really IT focused. We've got collaboration tools, we've got email, we've got security tools. What about the business users in this process? I mentioned them in my introductory remarks.
I did. I heard that too. And I think that in the presentation that you guys delivered, the content is absolutely important for IT to know the direction that they're trying to go in with enabling these workloads. But the businesses have to be part of this process. It's critical to the end success. So when you talked about your level 100 areas in collaboration, what we really need to do is identify, well, what's the business outcome in all of that? With the agencies and the departments within government organizations, to have them part of this process, I always like to call them champions. I always have my champions within the business that are helping us lead to that desired outcome. because we're not turning the service on for the sake of turning it on. We're turning it on because we're enabling the business to be more productive, to be more relevant and important to what they're doing in their day-to-day job.
So for our IT organizations that are watching right now, what advice would you have for them to engaging the business users?
So I have a lot of advice. But if I were to narrow it down, one of the things that I find critically important, because this is a journey, like your first session, this is not just turning one thing on or moving mail. I would say you have your executive sponsorship that is always visible throughout this process, throughout this journey. And to have the executive sponsor have their sponsorship team, and that team really needs to be represented in the business. The commissioners, the leads of these agencies, the department heads, people who have a stake in what the outcome's going to be and how are my users going to be impacted and what's the benefit that this brings to me long term. So having that sponsorship team, I think, is critical to the long-term outcome.
And Aaron, how are you seeing a balance? Obviously, you come from a technology background. I mean, for anybody who's not following Aaron on LinkedIn, you should be, because you'll have the greatest tools ever come across. But from a technology perspective, right? So we've got our technologists, we've got our business users. How are you seeing that come together?
Well, Steve, frequently, I come in at the sales process to help the businesses determine what it is they're going to do. And like Denise said, really providing some of that guidance and some of those potential next steps. What I really try to coach my customers towards is figuring out, what is really going to enable their business going forward. Looking at future purchases, things that are really close to them on the roadmap. If they're going to be buying storage soon, say, hey, is there an opportunity for us to maybe use some of these new services you've acquired? If they are looking at security investments, looking at some of the things they've already acquired through the Office 365 or the M365 suites, those are really the things that I try to challenge my customers with as we start looking towards how to deploy the Office 365 suite.
So one of the things that I find all the time with our customers when we are talking to them is that they seem to have a somewhat of a grasp on the technology that they own. But they don't seem to make that part oftentimes of their budgeting processes and their planning processes. So really what Bob and Jerry were saying, hey, let's have a plan, let's have a maturity, let's look at where we are today and where we want to go. That's really, and I know you have a session later, Jeff, but that's really part of the whole security piece. Like Microsoft's a security company now, and they own it in this M365 stack. How are you seeing and how are you working with customers to get them to understand, hey, you own this now?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges, because from an you already own it perspective, and with the broad suites that Microsoft bundles together these days across the full range of collaboration tools and security products and everything else, they need to understand that from a crawl, walk, run kind of model perspective, there's a lot of great low-hanging fruit that they already have access to that can implement very easily. Low impact to the business, low impact to the user base, and it's just quick wins. Within 0 to 3 months, put these things in place, it'll dramatically improve the security of your organization while limiting the impact and the shock to the user base themselves, so they can be productive, accomplish the mission of the organization, and complete what they need to complete. And then from there, from a roadmap perspective, what are the mid-term opportunities, what are the long-term things you can do? How are you managing your devices these days? How are you managing your identity and your access controls? So there's just so many great things that businesses can do these days based on what they already have access to, they probably don't even realize today.
Isn't that one of the challenges that we face in this incredible M365 platform, because it covers such a broad spectrum of things? How do we get our customers to, and our partners really, to look at it as a holistic view of changing the way that they do business today, but also integrating into their plans they have today? Because oftentimes security's been so siloed, collaboration's been so siloed, email's been so siloed. Bob and Jerry, I don't know who wants to take this, but how are customers accepting the maturity model, and how are we presenting it so they see it as a plan, an inclusive plan?
Well, I think one of the things that we take on as a conversation right away, and tagging into what Denise was saying, is gathering and garnering those sponsorships within the organization is as you mentioned, a siloed approach, but our model says that if we're going to talk security, like Jeff was just talking about, we're going to go to the security sponsor and we're going to gain their trust and their understanding of where we're going to go there. The next step is the next sponsor that we have to go after. As we go through the model, the organization ties together as we go through that. So our ability to gather their understanding across the board as we have executive sponsorship, but it's really important to gather the sponsorships within each of the collaborative areas of the whole model so that they all come to us as a big picture, and then we can go back to them with the whole model. That ability to draw all that together is something that the process takes us through.
And I would just add, I think it's really important is sort of the cloud strategy session, which is where we ultimately go through that tool of the cloud maturity model with the customers. The first part of that session is the customer telling us not only about what they have, in a lot of cases we know that we might have even deployed it, but what they want to do, what they're trying to get accomplished. And to Denise's point, we often like to have, while we may not get the average end user in this session, some executive level champions that are more business focused, less about less directly from IT, to bring in, this is what we're trying to get done. Because once we hear what they're trying to get done, then when we sort of walk through the model, we can tailor the biggest issue is customers, they might generally understand what they own, and hopefully they have some general understanding of what they want to do. But what they don't know is that what they own lets them do what they want to do, right? Like that's the part that, that's the part that's confusing for customers. And so we kind of use, this process, but really you don't have to use ours. You can use any, which is just figure out this mapping, right? So walk through and say, these are our goals, and here are some technologies. Did you know that, you can accomplish this? I hear you're talking about you're really struggling, on the security front with this, that, or the other thing. Well, did you know that Cloud App Security gives you those capabilities? You don't need to go out to RFP for third-party.
I was just going to say, I think that's a really important aspect right there. Is as technologists, both from the partner side and from Microsoft side, is really being able to understand what it is that the suite encompasses, all of the features that we have, and so. Right. Well, I have all the time. Just give it a second; it'll change. But really, from that idea of getting the customers to stop talking about a particular, like a point solution or a particular item that they're trying to do. They want to implement XYZ feature, and get them to step back from that and say, I really have this goal of securing my mobile devices. I have this goal of enabling my users to use compose documents on their phones. So. Taking our knowledge as the technologists and the strategists to say, oh, your business goal is I want to be able to remotely access these applications securely. Here's the tools in the toolbox that we have to help you accomplish that. So instead of the customer necessarily dictating the exact end process that they want, or the exact end thing that they want, or the feature they think they want, let them be more general about what their overall business goal is, and let us approach them with what we think the tools are that we have to help them achieve it.
So I want to kind of throw a little bit of role play out here because we all love role play, right? Just a little bit of role play.
Are there any swords involved?
But Denise, I'm going to start with you, of course. But we all have so many customers that are coming at this from a very specific workload perspective. Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting across from a customer who just purchased M365, and they are sitting there saying to you, well, I've made this purchase because I want to move my email to the cloud, I'm interested in getting file shares off, and maybe I was right-sizing my Office Pro Plus licensing. How would you get that customer to start looking at a process like this?
Did you take notes?
I did take
any
notes.
process, really.
Yeah. So first, I think I'd right away extract the product conversation. Yes, there was absolutely an investment made, a significant investment for most of our customers, but tapping into exactly what Aaron just said, let's talk about what's the end goal, what's the end game, because that's going to be the goal that we're moving towards in each one of the segmented projects and steps and processes along the way. If the end goal is license right sizing, it's not going to be a very long goal to assume. But if we're talking about modernizing my workplace and improving my productivity and bringing my users into the field, those are all end goals that are absolutely critical, and we can move along that journey. So some of it is resetting the framework of that end goal, making sure that we've got the right folks involved, bring the business into that conversation, because we can very easily get stuck on the technical processes and we end up losing sight of kind of the end game. And the end game is going to be what we're going to delve into and try to uncover and really focus on long term.
Well, peeling back, so this is absolutely true story, true data. So if you ask end users what the top feature of Office 365 is, there's no product. They don't understand that anyway. There's not this specific, hey, I like the way you can right click on this or do that. The answer is that I can get to my stuff from anywhere. That's the answer. They might word it slightly differently, but when you aggregate it all up, you put it in that bucket, that's always the answer. So, and the reason why it's important to think that is there's about 15 pieces and parts of Office 365 that make that happen if you need to make it happen securely, right? So it's not about my goal is to turn on this feature. Oh, I want to deploy this. You have to understand. I want to make my CISO feel comfortable, and I want to make my end users happy, and together, let's figure out what it takes to do that in your environment, right? And that's just a totally different way of thinking about it than we usually do. Oh, are you ready to deploy OneDrive?
Yeah.
Right? Well, there's 9 different ways I could secure the data in OneDrive, and none of them are wrong. They're just flavors about what meets your needs. Do I secure the data? Do I secure the device? Do I secure the access? What do I do?
And none of those necessarily need to be mutually exclusive, because as long as you keep the big picture of, I want to accomplish this goal, as you were saying earlier, Denise, that's really the critical piece to have in play. Because anytime you go straight for the technology, the siloed product, it's inherently a very singular focus in one direction in terms of the perspective, versus having the big picture of saying, I want to be productive from any device at any time from any location I want. You can still be productive, you can still be secure, and accomplish the goals of the organization at large.
I'm going to say there's one more thing that I think is important here that is something that customers need to consider, and why this conversation is so much bigger than it was even a year or two ago, which was, it wasn't long ago that, E3, G3, whichever way you want to call it, was what customers bought, right? Like that's what most customers had. And more or less, yes, there were some differences, but more or less it was the core cow up in the cloud, right? Like, and everybody sort of had a handle on what that was. Well, today in customers, M365, whether it be G3 or G5, in many cases even G5, is what people are renewing as, what new customers are coming in as, right? And the delta of what was the Microsoft suite of products and technologies was this, and suddenly it's this. And so rethinking all of those things is a big part of how do I still get to this end goal and leverage all the stuff that I just bought.
Yeah, and if you were to try to understand what all that stuff is from a SKU perspective, it'll drive you mad. So we try to narrow it down to a capabilities approach. These are the capabilities you want to deploy, and we understand through the model what all the interdependencies are that Jeff was just talking about, that if you want to deploy that capability, these are the things you have to do and the order that you need to do them in.
So this drives one of my favorite conversations that I have on a regular basis now all over the place, really, which is the role of your Microsoft partner or your Microsoft team has really dramatically changed from how do you buy this and how do you implement it, which of course are still important topics, but really we're now artists, right? We're trying to help our customers, our partners, paint pictures. And we say, okay, let's paint a picture of where you want to be at a certain time frame, right? And then let's work backwards from there to find out where you are, and that's where the maturity model finds in. And then let's make sure that we can paint that picture in a secure, functional way.
Correct.
Right? But we have to help paint that picture, which raises the question for me, all right, fine, we've hired a partner or Microsoft to help us implement a project. We've got our Microsoft team that's there in place to help us paint these pictures, but we get this initial phase done. how do we keep painting pictures? Because the platform keeps changing, or our business needs keep evolving. So how do we keep painting those pictures? Anybody want to?
Well, I think one of the most important parts, is as Microsoft people, is really developing that close relationship with the customer to become almost embedded in their business to understand what it is that they're doing, so that as their businesses are changing, as their needs are evolving, we're already there with with the services, the features, the knowledge of what they already own or what's coming down the pike. To be able to say, I see your business goal as X, and again, just driving it back to that business conversation. I see your business goal as X. We haven't gotten to the point where we've deployed, ABC in your environment, but you do own it. So to meet your upcoming business goal, we can start talking about a project to bring these features in. I think that's really it.
It is that, and it's also the evolution. So like any good artist, they're never quite done their masterpiece. And so we look at it as an evolution. Yes, Microsoft will absolutely be releasing more features, more capabilities, greater security, and potentially even more marketed suites. Who knows? But it's that evolution. And with Planet Technologies, with the Microsoft team working in conjunction with the customer and really being committed and embedded in the customer's business, that evolution will just naturally take place. We've called it a journey, we've called it a transformation, but once we've actually jumped into the cloud and we're there, it's that evolution that has to take place.
And it's fair to then say that our customers should be expecting more than they have in the past as it relates to our involvement and our continued involvement in this journey.
Always.
Absolutely. And we definitely try to be a trusted partner and advisor to our customers through the full journey. Because coming from an on-prem kind of world, they're used to release model of every 3 years, the next version comes out. So they're prep over 3 years and get ready eventually. But now you're looking from a cloud perspective, innovation could come at a quarterly or monthly basis, and they how to keep track of all of this. So you've got to constantly evolve and be ready and help them along that journey from the beginning to end, and into the future as well.
So if you don't have a plan, you need to get one. Right? If your vision today is, I'm going to implement a bunch of point solutions as technology solutions, you're really missing the value. You might be gaining some projects, you might be gaining some technical wins, but you're not really capturing the value of what you actually purchased. Right? Look at it all. Make sure you understand everything that you have, everything that you've owned. Try to map it to where you're going to be successful in your business, where you're going to drive your mission forward, and build a plan backwards from there to how technology can help enable you with that.
And those plans are not just big picture plans. Those can, as we were talking before, those can be very incremental plans as well.
Absolutely.
That says I can take smaller steps with greater advantage and greater capability than I have today, and then move on an incremental basis to meet the bigger plan as well. Those are some of the greatest value adds that we have all along the way.
See, I didn't disappoint. I knew this was going to be a rock star panel. I really appreciate everybody's input on this one. Again, I think to me, the big takeaway for our customers is don't just implement technology, develop a plan, paint some pictures, let's work backwards to where you are today, and let's implement these solutions, not just technologies, to get you there. Guys, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. See, I did not disappoint. Definitely a rock star panel. So we've got Aaron with us. Aaron, thank you for joining. Denise, thank you for joining. Jerry and Bob and Jeff. So we've already had some questions come in. I want to thank everybody for attending. Down at the bottom of your window, you see a Q&A button. Definitely go ahead and shoot us your questions. We got a couple to start off with. So here's one for everybody. How do you prioritize what should come next?
So did you want to start with that, Jerry, or you want me to start?
No, go ahead, Bob.
So look, everyone's priorities are going to be slightly different depending on what your goals are. But I think the important thing is to sort of take a couple of variables and sort of put them into this formula, right? And so the first one is, what is the business goal for this particular thing you're doing, right? So Let's take an example. They say, hey, look, I got email, I got OneDrive, I might have enabled Skype for Business. What should I be doing next? And so, one of the things we do is say, okay, well, what are some of the things we're trying to accomplish? And often we try to feel like, well, we're not leveraging SharePoint enough. We have it turned on, but we're not doing much. We're maybe not leveraging Skype as much as we thought we wanted to, some of those things. So we say, we start looking at it and saying, well, hearing some of these business objectives, we're not leveraging them because we're not cross collaborating enough, some of these kinds of things. So hearing some of these, technology and business objectives together, right, we start saying, well, maybe it's time to look at Teams as a priority, right? So if we're not all in on Skype for Business, we know that the direction for Teams is a place to go, right? So long term, and then that also, by the way, pulls in the usage of SharePoint, et cetera. So we put in some of these objectives. We funnel in what's the barrier. Well, the barrier to deploy Teams is obviously there's a bunch of governance and set up conversations that have to happen, but there's not this enormous deployment. There's not a 6-week engagement to configure and go through those kinds of things. So fairly low barrier, tying to business objectives, and we go through. So we use that same kind of thinking all along the way as we go through things. Do you have anything you want to add, Jerry?
Yeah, I would just say the thing about the approach is, like you mentioned a minute ago about Teams and having to do a little bit of work around the security piece. You'd think we'd have a lot of that security foundation laid in place before we get started, but if not, then that's absolutely the case. The other thing I would say is that while we focus a lot of our energy around the workloads that we deliver from a Microsoft platform that are in the cloud, one of the other things that we like to do when they say, okay, I've done mail, I've done a number of things in initial workloads, one of the things we like to do is say, all right, well, where are your priorities as an organization? Where's your spend right now that you want to eliminate? Where are some of the cost barriers that you have in your organization that we think that we can at least affect in a positive direction for the organization going forward when it comes to adopting some of those solutions in the cloud? So it's sometimes not necessarily this is the next maturity model step, but this is also the next organizational step for the right way to go. And whether it's a fiscally responsible move or whether it's just a platform that really needs to be either revived or renewed, those types of scenarios come up often, and we just need to fit that discussion into the maturity model.
Yeah, I just one more thing to add real quick. I think it's important, and I've said it in a couple of other sessions and moments, but it always comes back to this, right? Which is prioritization between what is low-hanging fruit that maybe isn't tremendous value, but it's easy to do. Some of those make the list, right? Because there's not a big lift. And then, as we slide up the scale, what starts to provide the highest value for, medium effort, right? Because, look, if there's anything that's totally no effort and high value, you turn that on immediately. Hopefully we've already done that, right? But, as we start to move up the food chain a little bit, okay, this requires some effort, but provides lots of value. Those are what we need to be targeting on back to, yeah, this might provide a lot of value, but it's a 6-month project. Absolutely want to put that on the roadmap, but that's probably not next, right? That's or we're starting now for it to be delivered, but along the way, we better take some of those other easier to digest things and deliver them, because that's the other problem that we get all the time, right? Which is, let's not pick the 5 hardest things and say they're next and deliver nothing for 9 months, right? As far as where we go after, quote unquote, after we're done, right? That doesn't really work. What we need to do is have a secondary backup plan or a secondary workload that's going on that's providing some of these lower hanging things along the way of the big ticket item.
Yep.
I just wanted to go ahead and add in something that I heard both Jerry and Bob mention is it is really around some of that governance stuff, the governance pieces that we want to be thinking about. And really, they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. So when we start talking about governance concepts, I really think that, as you're nearing the end of one project, hopefully by that point in time, the project is kind of on autopilot, where maybe you're just migrating data, going through a repeated process that you've already developed. That's really the best time to start working on the governance for what happens next. Most of my customers go through the evolution in terms of, they do Azure AD because that's the foundation for everything. The next step they conquer is messaging, exchange. From there, as Jerry and Bob both pointed out, a lot of them look at what are the things that have the lowest barriers to entry, and frequently it's Skype. A lot of times it can also be Teams, in one of those two directions. Skype doesn't require so much in the governance because it's just you turn it on. You maybe have some design goals around security for archiving and messaging compliance. Teams has a little bit more governance around it. So again, kind of looking at it from that perspective of, what's my barrier for governance? What's my barrier for deployment? So investing some time in figuring out, how groups are going to be structured, how teams are going to be structured, who's going to be creating them, if you're going to delegate those responsibilities, if you're going to have naming conventions or expiration, some of those policies and things are, good governance steps to be engaging on while you're, finishing up your previous project, so that when that, you've checked the box off, you're ready to go on to the next project immediately.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Again, I want to encourage everybody to drop their questions in the Q&A bucket. The next one's a security question. So after the migration is complete, where should a customer start from a security perspective? So I'm assuming the migration here is probably email or OneDrive, something early in the phase here. So where do we recommend customers start from a security perspective?
All right, I'll take that one. So as far as post-migration, how do we get started in security? Where do I go next? Where should I start? The easy answer is SecureScore, securescoreoffice.com. What it basically does, it looks at the services you have in place today, looks at the security settings you have configured, and gives you a score based on those different options that you can configure across the board. So you can kind of think of it as like a credit score for security in a way for your services. So how it works is once it looks at your services and determines which things you have configured, such as, have you enabled multi-factor authentication for all of your tenant admins? Do you have mailbox auditing turned on for all your users? Things like that. And the great thing is also that it gives you informed information about what the setting actually is and why you should care, as well as a link to go actually turn it right then and there. If it's one of those one-click things, quick and easy, low-hanging fruit, no problem whatsoever. And it actually will give you information in terms of, is this something that's a low impact to my users, something that they would probably notice, or is it a high impact, such as turning on multiple factor authentication for everybody? Versus what administration, is this more overhead for my admins, or is this an easy thing for them to turn on and get it moving? And the great thing is that it shows you how you do over time. You can also look at a score analyzer, see what's changed. And then you can also see with a little slider bar, what additional things can I do to help improve my security overall? So that's a really quick way to see a list of options you can turn on, improve your security across the board for Office 365. And recently, just this year, Microsoft has actually added in Azure as well as Windows 10 to SecureScore. So you can actually go beyond your Office 365 and actually look at your Windows desktops, how you configure those from a security perspective. What about Azure? Do you have some great global settings in place to make sure that across the board you have an underlying fundamental security policies and things in place to raise the overall security posture of your environments across the board?
Thanks, Jeff. I just had one or two things I wanted to add, and then anybody else feel free to hop in. So number one, I think one of the biggest things around security that we're seeing that's different, right? So we get in, I mentioned, I think back in the recorded piece that, we saw customers that were coming in, they were standard Office 365 G3 or E3 customers, and that's shifting to M365 and, E3 and E5. And, that was a total outlier 2 years ago, and I think it's the norm as people are renewing. And why that's relevant to this particular topic is, yes, there's lots of other features, and we have other sessions, we're going to talk about those too. But when it comes to security, that's the big pile of deliverables, right, on the security front that we get from, as customers are renewing with these SKUs. And suddenly, SecureScore is more important than ever because you may not even know what they are. But secondarily, this drives some of these conversations with customers that we have, when we meet with our regular customers and sort of give them updates to talk about, okay, now that, I think we sort of had a little bit of an allusion to it during the session. Okay, so I'm trying to secure data on OneDrive, right? So I can make choices here, right? I can say, okay, am I trying to restrict access to it from specific or approved devices through things like Intune or conditional access in, Azure AD Premium? Or have I sort of taken a totally different track and say, you know what? Instead of worrying about all of those things, I'm actually just going to secure the specific data that we find sensitive, right? So, are we going to classify data differently and say, hey, we're going to create DLP policies that prevent the data from being put in there in the first place, or that force additional, RMS encryption or information rights management, or any of these kinds of Azure information protection, the whole kit and boodle for these M365 G5 customers, right? And so, there's a lot of choices that we need to do. So what I recommend around this piece is a discussion, whether it's internal with your staff, et cetera, to come up with what what are your tenets in securing information? Because example, I know you referenced that you can do these things, you can make these choices in a vacuum, but do I need to put a whole bunch of conditional access rules across if I'm sure the only data that's up in OneDrive is data that that it's been additionally secured if it's sensitive, right? Or do I say, I'm not going to worry about you downloading that and putting it on your iPad because it's encrypted additionally through IRM, things like that.
So one of the things I'd add to that, Bob, is we do a periodic review of the cloud strategy and the cloud maturity model with our clients on a regular basis, whether it be quarterly or semi-annually. And one of the things Jeff just mentioned is something that we recommend that clients do on a periodic basis is to run that secure score on a regular basis. You never know what changes throughout the course of your consumption of the cloud services, and you never know what of those changes are security changes that maybe weren't necessarily those that could have been approved on a broader basis. So as we go through our cloud strategy sessions, one of the things that we'd like to try to recommend is to continually run, just like any other health check, a security health check as well. And that secure score is a great way to do that.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention, if you're an organization that has compliance requirements, which most organizations do these days, the Compliance Manager website will actually allow you to look at your tenant and see where you are from a compliance perspective. It has all of the controls, all of the different control families in place with regards to access or whatever, and has all the things that are secured by Microsoft from you in the shared trust model addressed. And it shows you the delta of the things that you can do to help improve your security and your compliance as well, to help improve things overall. So it's another thing we'd recommend as well. Compliance Manager site, you have NIST requirements, you have ISO requirements. Those are all encapsulated within that website. It's a really easy place to go look at where you are from compliance perspective, assign different tasks to different people to take care of things, make sure they've been addressed and tested and implemented in your environment.
Yeah, and I just want to remind all of our attendees that we do have a session at 2:00 today specifically on M365 and M365 security. So moving on, I want to address this to the Microsoft folks on our panel. A question came in, around how are you helping customers understand what SKUs they should be renewing or acquiring? So I don't know if Denise or Aaron, if you guys want to address that.
Sure, I'll step in here. So on the customer success team, we're working very closely with the account executive and the ATS to help with that. Really, it's around one, what is it you're using today? And given that we are so entangled right now with our customers around their adoption and usage, this is where what they're renewing and what they're moving to has to match, one, what they're doing today, but also where they plan to be over the next few years. I've had a lot of customers who would break suites up depending on the user type that they had out there. And a lot of them are now moving to a more all-up single suite model, because although the one size fits all doesn't fit everybody, it is something from a management perspective that you're not giving up in the process as well. I would also say start early, 90 days before your renewal, but you're also doing those yearly check-ins too at your true-up time. So this should not be a foreign conversation. So it should be something that you're having with your account team on at least an annual basis. So Aaron, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Really just a couple. I mean, as we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, security is more and more of a focus. So I've been working with a lot of my customers in particular to to really start addressing some of those other security challenges that they have in their organization. So a lot of customers are moving towards multi-factor for everything type of environments. So we start talking about how to what are the differences between Office 365 MFA and Azure MFA, and which one's the right fit for them. And I think Bob had mentioned earlier some things about conditional access. We have a lot of discussions around conditional access, mobile access, especially when it comes to preventing unauthorized access or challenging access from unfamiliar locations. Those have become increasingly important, especially in the government space. I think as governments are a huge attack target for especially for foreign entities. So being able to provide those access policies and those conditions that say, hey, I see that you have a username and a password, but you're coming from an IP address that's unfamiliar to me, an IP range, a country, a mobile device, something that is not familiar to me. I need to go ahead and go through some extra steps to make sure that you are who you say you are. We have a lot of additional controls and automation that are provided in some of the suite SKUs. So as Denise had mentioned, I see a lot of my customers moving towards that just so they can take advantage of all of those security features across every person in their organization.
I have a real quick follow-up. I have a couple of questions here I need to address, and we only have a few minutes on that. But I'm curious for Aaron and Denise, what, for those customers that are currently or are licensed from an Office 365 perspective, what are you seeing the real driver for them to be looking at that M365 SKU?
For me, the one is, really as we shift more towards that, trying to get people into that subscription model, I think, because it's over the long term, it serves them better with the more frequent updates than I think the 3 or 5 year cycles that we addressed in the previous session. So being able to use Windows as a service, as well as when they step into the M365 SKUs, they're getting the conditional access and they're getting some of those advanced Azure AD premium features as part of it, so that we're able to better help them secure their environments with the tools that come right out of the toolbox.
And for me, we've been talking about it this whole session, it's around the security side. So as I enable more service, I want to turn on more layers of security. So the M365 definitely drives that. Also desktop transformation. Windows 10 is where all of our customers are moving to right now if they've not already done so. And so if I'm licensing Office 365, I'm licensing Windows 10, and now I want to have a robust enterprise-grade security component to protect all of my services. And go back to what we saw in the video when we were in session, is allowing my users to access their information anywhere, anytime, on any device. And so M365 addresses that whole piece.
Terrific. One question here, I think this might be our last question. What is the role of an organization